This past Shabbat, I was able to tell the story of three different lives, three different people who all suffered in their lives but dealt with their suffering differently. Each one experienced and dealt with their victimhood in different ways. Each one were certainly victims, but they dealt with being a victim in different ways. The first example I gave was Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, one of the greatest trumpet players of all times, some say even the creator of American jazz, experienced such a terrible, terrible lifestyle growing up. Really, really a hard lifestyle. Growing up in a single parent home, in a broken family, really, really poor in New Orleans, was thrown in jail as a child, was sent to a home for troubled kids. But yet, through his music and through his um, vibrant style of life, he was able to bring joy to so many people. At the end of his life, writing the amazing hit "What a Wonderful World," saying that although I experienced suffering personally, my answer to that is to actually try to bring joy to others and to try to see the positive in life. But of course, that's not possible for everyone. Some people react very different to suffering. And actually, in our parsha last week, in Parshat Toldot, Yitzchak, Isaac, was a great example of that. You see, Yitzchak also had a very hard childhood, growing up with Abraham, who wanted to sacrifice him, wanted to slaughter him as some sacrifice, not able to trust his father, and also growing up in a very, very hard stance. And so, for so much of the Torah, we see that Isaac is very silent, is a very withdrawn person. And when he finally actually has children, we actually see that he relates very differently to his children. He says the Torah says that he liked Esau better than Jacob. Why? Because he had a taste for meat. That Isaac liked meat and Esau was therefore a very good hunter, so he liked Esau better. Is that really the way you're supposed to like your child? Because they give you meat? They give you the food that you like? No, you're supposed to love your child just because they're them, right? I even told an anecdote that if you ask a married couple, right, why do you love each other? And they're able to say one thing about the other person. It's because they make this certain kind of dish. You probably know there's a problem with the relationship, right? Love shouldn't be based on any one thing. Love is for the whole entire person. And so we actually see that Isaac is not able to love in the world because in some ways he embraces his victimhood and sees himself as such as a victim. And what a victim ends up doing, someone who makes themselves a victim, ends up othering other people, ends up using other people for what is good for them and not loving them for all who they are, right? And that's how we see that Isaac actually takes his suffering and keeps himself as a victim. The third person that I brought up, also a person who dealt with so much suffering, a Jewish hero, Elie Wiesel, obviously a survivor of the Holocaust, of some of the worst horrors that the Holocaust had, and dealt with it not by just saying life is good or life is wonderful. Yes, I suffered, but life is wonderful, like maybe Louis Armstrong did, but recognizing that he suffered and actually turned it out to make sure that it's not, that no one else will suffer like he did, right? To really see his own suffering and not just say, I'm only going to look out for myself from now on, just like Louis Armstrong did, but to say, through my suffering, through people understanding what I went through, we will make sure that no one else goes through the same thing. And that's another way of taking our suffering and not just becoming a victim of our own suffering and nursing and cultivating and marinating in that suffering like Yitzchak did, which again changes the way we see other people, but instead turning it outwards to make other people's lives better, to make the world better around us, that we don't have to be completely controlled by our suffering. Otherwise, we just make our suffering more. Each and every one of us suffer in our own ways, and we have to choose how we're going to deal with that suffering, whether we're going to let ourselves become an eternal victim of it, or we're going to go out and start a life and be able to bring goodness into the world in whatever way, whether it's like Louis Armstrong or whether it's like Elie Wiesel. But we should try not to be like Yitzchak, because then we constantly can't see people for who they are. We can't truly embrace other people, and we become a victim of our own suffering eternally. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.